Peter Boghossian, you're joining me today. We are at the Battle of Ideas, and it's a bit of an interesting, weird, strange one because just outside there are, what would you say, thousands or tens of thousands of people? Yeah. What's going on outside at the moment?
There is a rally for Palestinians and specifically about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
And what are your thoughts as to the motivations of many of the people there?
Well, it's interesting you should ask because we actually asked many of the people. My friend Reed and I are doing videos here, among other things, in London. And we actually asked what they wanted. So we went to Speaker's Corner. We've been to 2 rallies so far. This is the 3rd, but we have the Battle of Ideas, so we're not there. And we actually asked people what they want. Most people do not have a solution to the problem. I don't know if it's many or most, but a lot of people will say, we want peace and justice. And then when you ask them what peace is, so they traffic in the meanings of the different meanings of the terms. They mean something very different by peace and justice than what you and I mean.
Okay. Well, let's start then with what we mean, and then what do they mean?
Well, what do you mean when I say peace?
People not arguing with one another.
Yeah, people getting along, not killing each other. What do you mean by justice?
I suppose if someone's killed someone, you want to put them in prison. Is that what I mean? I think I mean that.
Well, yeah, they're different. So without being overly, I don't know, do you want me to be overly philosophical?
Go on.
Yeah, well, there are different types of justice: retributive justice, punishment, distributive justice. In the history of Western intellectual thought, it starts with Socrates and the Republic, books 1 through 3 of the Republic. What is justice? And that question continues, is justice paying your debts? It's like, what is justice? It continues in that tradition up till John Rawls in the 70s when John Rawls talks about justice as fairness. So a just society, my view is that a just society has to be a fair society. So how do we create conditions in the society to make it more fair? We can talk about that. I think the right is not correct. I think the left is not correct. I think that we've lost sight of the bigger picture. But even that conversation diverges significantly from what many of the people outside mean when they say justice. And the reason I know that is because we've gone on the streets and we've asked them. We've asked and we have it on film. We've asked the CAF. So they mean some kind of remediation of past injustice. They mean a kind of Palestinians have been living under the boot of the Israelis for so long, and now it's time for justice, either to turn the tables or from the river to the sea. So they mean something very different by justice. But unless you actually ask them that, you can't assume that your conception of justice and their conception of justice is the same. And again, that has nothing to do with Israelis or Palestine or Jews or anything. It's just figuring out what people mean when they use words. And that's not an academic thing, too. It's just like, what do you mean when you say justice?
And so when you've spoken to these people, you're ascertaining that they mean to, are we saying to kill Jewish people, to get rid of them?
Some do. Some mean that for sure. Our cab driver was pretty explicit about that. Others do not. Others mean a 2-state solution, or others mean some kind of retribution for previous injustices suffered by Palestinians. But again, the only way you would know that is if you actually ask them, which is why I wrote the book, How to Have Impossible Conversations, how to figure out what people mean by just asking them questions. Well, what do you mean by that?
Do you think that we rely too often on slogans and we don't actually think through, from the river to the sea? Do you think most people really have thought about what that means when pro-Palestinian people say that?
It's a good question. I don't know. I'm no expert in the Middle East at all. And as a general rule, I avoid talking about things that are outside my area of expertise. I don't have a solution to the problem. If I'm forced, I would say 2-state solution, but I don't really know. I'm no expert at all. And that's putting it mildly. But I am interested in the way people talk. I am interested in what people believe. I'm extremely interested. One of my research areas is why someone changes their mind. What causes people to change their mind? What is an intervention on a personal level? What is a macro intervention on a societal level? And how do we get people to rethink, either to rethink some of the positions they hold or to doubt some of the positions they hold so they become less confident and more humble? And how do we get people to start listening to each other again and talking to each other again?
It's such a complicated one because obviously if we talk about those people out on the street right now, I imagine there's such a variation in a variety.
I'm positive that's true.
Yeah. And so, and some must think, well, hang on, you don't speak for me. You're saying something, I'm trying to say something much more nuanced and you're really going for it. How do you, when you go and speak to these people, and you spoke to them in the last few days a little bit, did you attempt to change minds a bit? Did you, and how could you have success with that?
Yeah, I attempted to instill doubt in people. So no matter where, so we put mats on the Stratford Station or Speaker's Corner or Regent's Park, and the mats strongly disagree, slightly disagree, neutral, and on the other side agree. And wherever they'll stand, I'll ask them, well, what would it take? So let's say they stand on the slightly disagree. Well, what would it take to move you to the neutral? There should be a two-state solution. Okay, so they stand on the slightly disagree. What would it take to move you one mat, just one, to the agree? Just one mat, what would it take to move you to the neutral? And one of the things we found, we just released this video so you can watch it yourself, but one of the things we find, if we have somebody, we did this with the two-state solution, there should be a two-state solution. One person went to agree, one person went to disagree. And then we asked them to write down their best reason. What's your best reason for believing that? And then we asked the person opposite them to guess what their best reason was. And they couldn't guess it. They didn't even know why someone would believe that. That will show you, if nothing else will demonstrate the difficulty of this problem. It's not even an incommensurable problem. It doesn't even rise to the level of being incommensurable because nobody understands why anybody believes anything. Of course, we've done that to ourselves, but
is that like, I mean, is that what empathy should be? Is empathy? I've been thinking about this myself. People always talk about, I'm so empathetic, and often they mean they get very sad when something happens to their in-tribe. Is true empathy about being able to appreciate the other side? Is that what empathy is?
Should ask Paul Bloom that question.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure empathy, maybe it's a useful heuristic, or maybe it's a useful tool to help solve the problem, to be empathetic to the Israelis or be empathetic to the Palestinians. There's just so many accrued years of detestation. I'm not sure that empathy would be a useful tool in that. I think the first order of business would be to try to figure out what someone believes and why they hold the position, not agreeing with them. But like, well, why does someone believe Israel is, I don't want to talk about this whole thing, it's too much of it. Like, well, why does someone believe that Israel doesn't have a right to exist as a state? Why does someone believe it has a right to exist? And then to just do your best to figure out, okay, so you just heard him give the reasons. What did he say? Like, ask them to repeat the reasons back. Like, I think we're not even remotely close to empathy yet. Like, not even, we don't even know the best reasons for why people would believe the most rudimentary things about the conflict of people with whom they disagree. Like, we're not even at that stage yet.
How do you even, is it sort of that, is it Wittgenstein? Sort of, if you could speak to a lion, it wouldn't understand.
Yeah.
If a lion could speak English, it's almost that same thing. I grew up...
Donald Davidson too, yeah.
Right. I grew up in a Jewish family, and obviously... But here's the thing, when something horrible happens in Palestine, we mourn as a family. We sit there going, oh no, and part of that is also going, God, this is going to look so bad for us. I have to admit, that's oh my God, what's going to... And then part of that is that's a loss of life, and you see the images of children and babies and things. It's the worst thing ever. But I feel like there are people on both sides who, when those horrible things happen, the first thing they're thinking is, right, how can I use this politically and ideologically and beat the other side?
Yeah, 100%.
What is that?
Well, it's a kind of tribalism. It's, I wish I could blame it on something as facile as a YouTube algorithm, but it's a conflict that has been going on for a long time. I'm not the person to have this, with whom you should have. Sure, this is way outside my area of expertise. I do find it to be very blunt with you. I do find it to be disheartening now that I've gone around and I've spoken to people carrying signs, and so I'll say to these people, okay, so what's your solution? What do you think should be done? No idea. Not even a two-state solution on one state. Like, no, I don't know. It's complicated. Okay, well, what do you mean? Like, so they feel strongly enough that they're holding a sign, but they don't even have a vague notion. I think maybe again, and I'm hypothesizing, partially I'm inferring from what people have told me, but they want their elected leaders and the politicians to know that they support the Palestinians, and so they're out in mass. So public policy will change as a result of when they see people demonstrate. By the same token, I would think that they would have some idea of how to have some kind of a meaningful solution to save life. Some idea. And person after person, when we've gone to the rallies and Speaker's Corner, no clue. It's complicated. I don't know.
I find that really infuriating. And it is just, you just have to ask one question further for the whole thing to fall apart. And that's, I guess it's a very human thing. We get very passionate and excited and we don't necessarily think things through. But I've also wondered the same thing. I think free Palestine is a very noble idea. Why shouldn't these people be free? And then you go, how? And I'm sitting there thinking, how? And people I know will be shouting at the screen now saying, a two-state solution. Well, the two-state solution has been offered twice to Hamas. Secondly, it involves Israel pulling out. Well, they pulled out of Gaza and look what happened. So if you're the Israeli politician going, my only job is to look after the Israeli people. That's the only thing I care about. That's my one job I'm hired to do. The last thing you're going to do is pull out even further and from the West Bank, which is significantly larger than Gaza. That's absolute madness. So that can't work. And a one-state solution obviously can't work because there's so much hatred between these two people. How could they possibly coexist together? So there has to be a solution, but I have no idea what that is.
Well, you're asking the wrong guy.
Yeah, well, what I can ask you though about is, I think, one of the people I've spoken about recently who got involved in this was Greta Thunberg.
Yeah.
And it's a similar thing with the climate change situation. I think most people, I mean, even if you don't agree with I think it's 97% of scientists about climate change, I just like the idea of there not being smoke in my face. And if there's a renewable, nice way of doing it, that's lovely and that's great. But obviously, to change to a society like that, a lot of people are going to lose a lot of jobs. A lot of people are going to suddenly be poor. Probably not Greta Thunberg, probably not me or you, but a lot of people. And it's another situation where if you're asking a question, and if you actually ask another question, okay, Greta, how do we do this?
Yeah.
I've not heard her say that. So what I want to ask you as well is partly that and partly what's going on where she can put out something about Israel-Palestine and in the same photo have this thing about climate change as if they're somehow linked.
Yeah, so there's a lot to talk about there. The first thing is when someone tells you they don't know, I think a great response is thank you.
Okay.
Because that way they're not pretending to know things they don't know. So what's the solution to Israel? I don't know. You know what? That's actually a great answer because we have so many people who are suddenly experts on anything that's relevant to the 24-hour news cycle. They act as if they have PhDs in virology, immunology, Israel. Now everyone's an expert in the Israeli-Palestinian problem. People who never thought about it for two seconds. So there is a kind of amplified by social media and clicks, et cetera. So I think that's one thing that we need to be aware of is that we need to create cultures where people proportion the confidence in their beliefs to the evidence they have for those beliefs. And one of the ways to do that is when someone says, I don't know, is to say, that's a great answer. Thanks for that. That's a great answer. Thanks for not BSing me. Okay, now back to the Greta thing. So ideologies cohere. So usually you'd only need, I think it was Hitchens who said, if I know two beliefs that you have and I can infer a third, you're a very boring person.
Yeah.
So that means that your beliefs, because they cohere around an ideology, it's all, and given that not almost by definition, ideologies cannot be true in terms of being proportioned to the evidence. So people have extended the confidence in their beliefs beyond the warrant of the evidence. And so ideally it would be like a pointillism painting. They'd be just, you would have different beliefs of different things based upon the evidence, and then maybe that they would probably cohere in terms of a picture, but the picture wouldn't be an ideological coherence. It would be, of the painting, it would be a coherence based upon evidence. So we formulated these beliefs based upon reason and evidence. And you know what? And that's why we ask people the question all the time, what would it take to move you one mat? If they say nothing, then the belief isn't formed on the basis of evidence. Because to change your mind about something means that there has to be a piece of evidence that would come in that would cause you to change your mind. And so when and Michael Schellenberger has written some great stuff, a very, very close friend of mine, Apocalypse Never was a great book. And he's spoken at length about the idea that bracketing for a moment anthropogenic global warming, climate change, if you just bracket that, what are some energy solutions and why should we a priori take some of those solutions off the table like nuclear? So so to answer your question, those ideologies cohere precisely because they're ideologies and they're not formed on the basis of evidence. If they were formed on the basis of evidence, then they wouldn't cohere unless you wanted to make the argument that there are certain ideologies that are just intrinsically true. But if that were the case, then they wouldn't be ideologies.
Yeah.
So the whole thing falls apart.
And I suppose a lot of it is related to what is being called intersectionality and postmodernism.
Yeah.
And that's how you end up with climate change, LGBT, and Palestine, which don't seem to work.